All right. Hello, everyone. Good morning. I want to just start things up. Hold on a second. I'm going to move all sorts of pages around. It'll be a thing, but we'll start in a second. Boop-a-doo. All right. And just on time to start up. So, let me also just double check my sound, make sure that's working properly. It seems to be working properly. Let me know if, and because I have a microphone here, I'm hoping the microphone is working as expected. It seems to be getting the proper amount of gain. Actually, it's not. Maybe. Yes. How clear am I? I should be pretty loud. All right. Good enough for me. I'm I'm a little gun shy. I keep on doing these videos, and I redid some videos for 2400 and then found out there's a lag. So I'm doing one of those freeze frame things in my video. And so I'm going to have to redo the whole darn thing again just because, sound and computation, computers problem. Okay, so let's get going what we're doing today. I actually wanted to change what the lecture was first. Actually, I want to bail out of this one. And this. This is what we're going to be looking at first, and then we'll go to the other one. So what we were doing last time, when last we left our heroes, we were looking at partitioning our views. And part of the exercise, I'm wondering if I want to submit this one or not. It's just useful to play around with it. Maybe break out a piece of paper on this one. The idea is your data can be split in a whole bunch of different ways. And I have an analogous, but not exactly the same kind of example here, normally to break up class monotony. We just didn't get all the way to the end of the lecture. When we're partitioning our views, there's a wide variety of different ways we can do it. That's somewhat of the point of all of this, is if I have just data, I have a whole bunch of different attributes, there's all sorts of different ways I could slice and dice it. I could remove some of the data, some of the items. I could view only some of the attributes. I can combine attributes and get aggregate data. I can change this, I can change that. In fact, that's part of the art form, is I have so many different views, so many different ways I can split it. In multiple different ways I could split it in each of these times. I can make it even hierarchical. That this partitioning actually becomes part of the art form that we're dealing with, or part of what we're dealing with. So let's see here. Lecture 11, part 2. Okay, so how many different ways can you partition this text? You could let me give you an example. I could separate the vowels from the consonants. Two different groups, one set of vowels in this string of text. So E, O, A, I, A, E, A, E. Those are the vowels. Everything else, consonants. How else could I partition this string of text? Right. I would like to do this for like a minute. Just crank out a bunch of different examples. I'll do the same thing over here. I'm going to mute myself first. Actually, I won't even mute myself, but crank out as many different ways as you can partition this string of text and see how many we get. And then you can throw into the chat what you end up doing with, what you end up going with. Mm-hmm. Oh. There we go. There's a. All right. This is just a first pass for me on this. And in case I'm not expecting you to read all this, I would like you guys to actually open up the chat though and throw in what you have for in the chat for some of the ways you partition this. So for me, one of the things I did was I took all the capital letters, plopped it on one side. I took all the lowercase letters, plopped it in another group. And I took all the punctuation as a third group. I could have done that. What other things did you guys try? I'm hoping you tried it. What other ways can you partition this? The actual exercise is there to get you into the swing of like, oh, it's to creatively think about that what you think is fairly simple is actually more convoluted than you might think. What else do you guys come up with? Height. Oh, yes. I forgot about height. Yes. Beautiful. That's completely unorthodox. Wonderful. Sort them alphabetically. Fantastic. We're partitioning, so you can partition alphabetically as well, which is what I did. I did the first 10 letters, and then the next 10 letters, and then the next, well, 6 afterwards. Oh, ordering words by quantity of letters. Beautiful. Love that too. All 3 are great suggestions, by the way. Anything else? Okay. Who would have thought that? Ordering words by quantity of letters. That's exactly it. There's some obvious ones in there. The first sentence and the second sentence. That's an easy one, but that's not remotely as unique and fun as those. Other ones. I did one that I was happy with. Groups the same letter, perfectly fine. Great. That's a bit more, it's more predictable than the height, but both are good. As in predictable, as in what people would intuitively go, yeah, that works. Vowels versus non-vowels, great. Anything else? Really, a real like crazy pants one? I have a semi-crazy pants one. I have EOAAEAPE. Not vowels and consonants. What am I using? Whether the character itself is open or closed or not, right? So all the E, the O's, the A's, they have a loop where that connects and makes a circle of some format, an enclosed white space, versus the ones without an enclosed white space. So I separated by that. You can do punctuation itself, punctuation versus non-punctuation. Oh, you got all those spaces. I forgot about all of those spaces. Yeah. Right. There's a whole bunch of different number of strokes to write the number of strokes to write the letter. Beautiful. Right. And you can also work at it on a word by word basis, or you can originate words by quantity of letters. Right. That's on a clustered by a word by word basis, not on a character by character basis. You can cluster it by sentence basis. All of them are good. That's the point. When we have a data set like this, we don't know how we're going to partition this thing. People have been like, I'm going to pick on we got to give a good name for you guys, the Ottawa Activities Group, whatever we want to call it, you guys. Come up with a really snazzy name. But with that group, I mean, they have a whole lot of data. And we were looking at, how you would parse or find things to do while, all like, how do I want to frame this? Coffee hasn't kicked in yet, by the way. If I want to look for a place to go skating, if I want to look for a place that has a splash pad, if I want to look for a swimming pool, if I want to look for hiking trails, if I want to look for all of these open outdoor activities that are available in Ottawa, they're seasonal in nature. And now, if I said I want to look for a tennis court, okay, you could use a system for that, and that's where they were aiming it. And that's a perfectly valid way of aiming it. but is that necessarily what the user wants? Now, if I switch it around and say, I'm bored, I want something to do today. Now, I don't want to look at tennis courts and then go back and look at swimming pools. I want activities I can do in the summer. That's a different task. I want to see both the swimming pools and the tennis courts at the same time. I want to see which ones are private, which ones are public, because I don't have a membership to a tennis court, but maybe I just want to go play tennis. So free versus membership-based pools make a big difference. Covered versus open. I'm going to see if I can find this while talking here. Covered versus not covered skating rinks. Skating rinks with lights. I'm hopefully photos. I can't see anything at all right now. All these things are blocking my view. I'm going to see if I can plop this up on the screen here. There we go. There we go. So this is using night sight. My phone has the sort of night sight option so that I don't need artificial light. I don't need a flash. It is pitch black. It looks like it's sunset. It ain't sunset. It's very dark outside. It just happens to allow us to see each other in the photo. This is my son and I going skating a couple days ago on what a puddle rink, as their data set saying. And they're like, what's a puddle rink? That's a puddle rink. If there are no lights and it is essentially just a big bucket of water on the ground and there's no boards around there, are you playing hockey on this thing? No, you are not playing hockey on this thing. If you go off the edge, if you try and go after the puck and you miss, you're in a snowbank. It's a pain in the ass. You want a board. On top of that, the ice itself is extremely, flaky, and it's actually cracked around the outside edges. You're not going to fall in like you would with a lake because it's not deep enough. But my son fell on his knees that day and really, banged up his knee quite badly. Why? Because he couldn't see where he was going. This is bumpy old ice. And this is what knowing that piece of information is critical for certain tasks that you're going to do, and how you partition the data tells you what you need to do. Close that up. So hopefully that makes some sense. What you have for the data, you might think, I'm still showing that data, but how you partition it, the data is the same. How you partition it, how you change it, how you group things changes the task. So if you're looking for COVID tests, just to say how many COVID test places there are in the city, it's very different than the COVID places near me. Or based on, I'm looking for where I can go, what data, how I partition that data. I want local places with a lot of data, not all the places with a little bit of data. Slightly different or very different task, same data set. Okay. We're just an aside here. We're going to look at glyphs. Glyphs, not hieroglyphics or anything like that. And I'm going to be very hand-wavy nonchalant about glyphs. A glyph has the same kind of thing when we're talking about, Marxism Channels and stuff like that. It's going to do the same thing. The difference is, so we don't have a definitive definition. There's no clear line in the sand. Oh, that's a glyph, or is this the visualization? But a glyph is using one or more marks to encode data in a data set, normally one element at a time. And I can have macroglyphs or microglyphs. I'll get to that in a second. But effectively, a glyph is a way of encoding a whole lot of data for an item. It's an item with a bunch of attributes associated with it. Perhaps an example is the best thing to go with. Here are a bunch of glyphs. Notice this is technically a glyph. A turn-off face is actually a glyph. If I did a whole bunch of pie charts, and yes, there are times when a pie chart sort of makes sense. Bar chart's probably better still. But radar chart also works. But if I put a whole bunch of pie charts on a map, if I do a whole lot of bar charts on a map, if I have what is a sunburst visualization, or if I do any number of other each item, let's say each state or each province, I plop down a data point, or maybe each city with COVID tests, right? Each city has a point on it where I'm encoding a lot of data or a number of attributes for that one city. It's called a glyph. I'll have a whole bunch of glyphs on one map. The visualization itself is the map, and I have glyphs on top of it. Imagine it's the idea that a glyph is the segregation or the separation between a glyph and a visualization, a bunch of multiple visualizations, is kind of fuzzy. The idea of a glyph is I can encode a whole lot of information and I can put it on another visualization. If it is by itself, then it's a visualization. So, by the way, these are also glyphs right here. Each one of these encodes a lot of information about this particular data point in space, and I could put a whole bunch of them in there. I could put like a grid of a whole bunch of different glyphs on a map, or have a whole bunch of glyphs just in a matrix. This is also technically a bunch of glyphs. So here is a glyph. Technically, it's a bar chart per state. So California, not Texas. TX is Texas. What's TK? I should have it in here somewhere, I think. If you know what TK is, not Tennessee, Texas. I don't know. New York, Florida, Illinois, Pennsylvania. TK, I don't know. Anyways, but how I partition it, notice this is by state with my different populations. This is my different populations by state here. They are not the same thing because this allows me to compare. Notice I'm better at comparing across states for a particular age group this way, this way, this way. If I partition my data this way, I get a cross comparison between states for an age group. This is how different age groups work for each state. I'm good at comparing these guys, not this to this, right? This big red bar and this big red bar. I can look at it, I can do the analysis, but it's not as effective as boom, right here, I just look across. So how I slice apart my data changes how I view things. And when I have glyphs, they're really great. They're really well designed for, I can see what the data looks like for this particular data point. If I have a whole bunch of glyphs, I can compare them, but it's really good for seeing the data for that data point and for that data point, each one independent from the other ones. Okay. So hopefully that makes sense for glyphs, what the difference. A glyph is just like a mini visualization. You can think of it as a mini visualization. It's encoding a lot of data for an item at a time. And we're going to be looking at Zoom techniques very soon. I just don't know. We'll leave it alone. We're going to be looking at this when we do overview plus detail on Tuesday. We'll look at this a bit more. The idea is we'll get to that. So I'm going to just skip it for now. We'll get back to this. By the way, in case you want to know things about glyphs, yeah, music note is a glyph. Another example of a glyph. Each item is a note I'm going to be playing, but I encode a lot of information about the length of the note, where it is on the scale, right? I have other glyphs, the other glyphs that are actually indicating other information about the data itself, but this is held for 2 beats. This is held for 1 beat. This is held for 1 beat, but it's an A, and a G. Yes, I can actually read treble clef. I'm very proud of myself right now that I'm remembering this, right? This is a beat. This is a half beat. Like this is 2 beats for my rests. They are encoding, each one of them is encoding a bunch of information. Not that much, but I string them all together and I get music. So here's Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. And I'm not sure if you know if you can just read this and see what it is. But yes, it's Beethoven's Fifth Symphony. So there you go. And people read this naturally. It's one of the nice ways. All right. I want to get to the real point of today, though. That was just to finish off the last lecture. Here's the real point of today. So what was supposed to be lecture 16 is now lecture 12 because half the groups have a map, it seems. So I want to make sure we hit that and maybe some storytelling as well, if I have time. So we really do take for granted how people just go, yeah, maps, because we deal with them all the time. We also don't think about how hard it is to read and write, for example, right? We do it all the time. We don't realize that it's a very, very ingrained skill that we've learned over time. But it's not as boring as it sounds, or I'm boring, because I find this fascinating that people just nerd out on maps. I mean, there's entire fields of study for just maps. I'm not even going to deep dive into it. I'm just going to give you the just enough to be dangerous kind of view. More importantly, not just what the map is, but what we layer on top of a map for visualization. So we're going to be learning about how to visually encode information on a map, and we're going to learn about different projections and why some work better than others, and different map types and how they relate to the task. The big part is how they relate to the task. It's not, again, not guesswork. So we've looked at all these sorts of things, but this is the weird one, right? We have all these abstract forms of data that we often have. And this thing is, I need geometry. And a map is a particular kind. I could also do other things for geometry. I could be looking at, airflow or simulations. I can be looking at neural anatomy with a visualization. It's spatially oriented. And the thing is, because it's spatially oriented, I'm allowed to twist the geometry a bit depending on the situation, but I can't really twist the geometry too much. I'm hoping I have a subway visualization. Maybe I should find a subway visualization, but I have spatial data. And because I have spatial data, I'm sort of being told how I need to represent it, but it also means it's intuitive. So the spatial arrangement is given to me, unlike, let's say, a field where I don't know where the grid pattern is going to be, unlike a tree where I could represent it a whole bunch of different ways and it doesn't really matter, unlike a bar chart or anything like that. This thing is, the spatial coordinates are given to me. I know where the country is. I know where the city limits lie. I know where the wards are. They're precisely laid out. It's not really that fuzzy. It's given. And as a result, though, it means I sort of just lean into that. I am given the geometry I'm going to be dealing with, and I use that geometry. There's no whether I should or not. Other times when I have abstract data, I get to choose what my representation is. In this case, I am given my representation and I can twist it a little bit. I can use different projections. I can, color it different ways or encode things different ways. But ultimately, the map's got to be there. Okay. It also is perhaps one of our oldest visualizations. And you're thinking, what the heck does cave paintings have to do with this? Well, they're 16,000 years old, these cave paintings. And what they found fascinating about this, and I'm not sure if I wholeheartedly believe this, it might be coincidental, but still fascinating that it works like this. It turns out that they map exactly to stellar constellations. It maps to the stars. What their cave paintings were mapped to, how the stars are, the stars in the prehistoric night sky. Which is like, what? No, what? So yeah, there might be something there, that it might be a star map encoded on top of the cave paintings, which would be fascinating in itself. But what we know for sure is that, maps are really, really darn old. 1400 BC, They have a claim map. I think it's to go to George's house or something like that, right? It's what we intuitively want to do. We take what we know and we project it from a top-down view. And you might think, well, obviously, but that's really hard as a concept to think of the world from a top-down view, and yet everyone does it in this way, in an intuitive way. So let's lean into it. So let's look at our Marxism channels. Here is just a fairly simple visualization. We have, North America. It's America centric, obviously in this case, but we have a bunch of glyphs on there, like these little triangles, just indicate the mountain ranges. We have the separation between the different countries. We don't have the separation between states and provinces, but between the countries. I don't know what part of Canada is that supposed to be. Is that Cape Breton Island? Anyways, not all that precise when it comes to the layout, but we get latitude and longitude. Great. Essentially each pixel is an X and Y coordinate. It's position in space, and it encodes information. We can also encode, using the color, what kind of land it is. Green for land, blue for water. Okay. We can also put glyphs on top of that, which have nothing to do with whether it's land or water. It's actually a glyph to indicate other information. We can put lines in there to indicate country borders. I could put different glyphs in there to indicate whether it's a forest or a desert or something like that. But let's have a look at what we have here. I'm going to encode 5 different attributes in this simple map. I have a bunch of points. I have a bunch of lines as well, which is the country borders. I have a bunch of areas, which is the actual country itself. And the areas can be indicating, so the points would be the glyphs here. The area is the country itself. The lines are actually the borders separating between them. I could also include other stuff as well on a map. But because we know what it's supposed to look like, we have a common point of reference. It's easy to put in a whole lot of attributes at once. We have X and Y coordinates. We have color. We have shape for the glyphs, for the mountain ranges. We have area, the shape of the land itself, or the size of the land itself. All with one silly, simple map. That's why we love maps. That's also why they're hard. So we can do a whole bunch of different things, and they're not all the same. So we can overlay and put glyphs on top of the map. That's one approach. We can color regions. That's choropleth map. So we can show granularity. We can color it based off lightness, darkness, how much hue. We can use different hues to indicate different areas, different items. We can use saturation or luminance, brightness, darkness, to indicate things like continuous data in the particular region. And then we can do the outline itself, can indicate some stuff, where the border is. So if you want to see, let me see if I can find a good example of this. I'm going to find another. US. There we go. That'll do it. Hopefully this is not going to be, there we go. What do we have here? We are using saturation to indicate brightness to darkness. You could consider it a divergent color scale, right? Oftentimes they'll use purple in between. They'll go from red to purple to blue if they want to use a divergent color with saturation. With saturation. You could also consider it 2 different hues. Doesn't really matter either way. Notice we also have some of the states, individual states, you can see where the various representatives are, like the states are chopped up. So it shows you which different districts you have for the House of Representatives per state. Canada does the same thing. Maybe I should use a Canada example, but Canada doesn't have the nice 2 colors. Canada would have, let's see, Canada House of Commons seats. And this, by the way, is ultimately the nice thing to point out when it comes to Canada, the weird, wonderful thing about Canada when it comes to that House of Commons. Clearly, the NDP are doing amazingly well. Why? Because we're using chloropleth map here, and the NDP are absolutely crushing it. Look how much land they're representing on this map. It's huge. Look at all of this land. Look at all of this land. Oh my gosh, they're completely crushing everyone else when it comes to how much they're controlling the country. The NDP are clearly the best, political group. You can disagree or agree with whatever the case is, but I'm hoping it's obvious where the bias is with the chloropleth map. If I just color based on geographic area, first of all, PEI means nothing to anybody. Here's PEI, and yeah, no space whatsoever, no geographic area. And Toronto, there's nothing going on in Toronto, obviously. I mean, chloropleth maps obfuscate some of the data that we're looking at because the size of the geographic region twists and perverts what's being shown here. By winning one area, in this case, Nunavut, right? For, I think they have maybe one seat, maybe two seats, right? There's hardly any representation for Nunavut, but because it goes to the NDP, it's a huge splotch of orange, and yet there's like 20 different 20 different representatives from Toronto, and you can't even see it. You'd have to zoom into the map here. It hides the things with high population areas that are really small, tightly together. They get suppressed. Anything that's a large area gets overemphasized, whether you want it to or not. That's the problem with the chloropleth map. Okay. But notice I have this, but what we're doing with the US vote map, however, is I can use a saturation level to see how much they're Republican, how much they're Democrat, what percentage of the vote went to the Republicans, which percentage of the vote went to the Democrats. And you can change the amount of saturation to indicate the percentage. You can use the color itself to say who the representative is, so whether it's a Democrat or a Republican. And we have a clear outline using this little white line here, but we have an outline for where the state boundaries are, where the various districts are. And so you get this high-level view of information. One other thing we could do when we were talking about lenses, we could actually put a lens on top of it. That's like a little space over top of your map where you get more information about. You can either zoom in or expand out the information, like a fisheye lens, so like a magnifying glass going over your map. Or maybe you only show, when you move the lens over it, you see something different about it, about your data set. So maybe you see the map of Canada, you move the thing over, and you see percentages or individual districts or where people, how people voted. Details on demand. Here is the other interesting thing about maps. Maybe you're not finding it interesting, but the world, here's a crazy idea. It's a sphere. I know some people think it's flat. There is a whole flat earth conspiracy theory thing going on. It's kind of wild. But but the earth is effectively a sphere. And as a sphere, you can't represent it on a two-dimensional plane. It just doesn't work. I know you probably went through this in high school, but maybe you didn't. So let's go over it again. So if I project it to 2D, depending on how I project it, it distorts the data in weird, wonderful ways. So if I try and represent it in 2D, I don't get this at all. I get this kind of squishy version of it. And I'm not going to show the YouTube videos on this. They're great YouTube videos, but effectively, if you take a three-dimensional thing and you try and flatten it out, and you have to make sure you show all of the Earth, you have to distort it. There's no choice in the matter. The Earth would get distorted because you can't go from 3D to 2D without some kind of distortion. So the question is, it's a pick your poison. How do you distort it? So on a small scale, we don't have to worry about this, but as soon as you get to Canada itself, like any kind of larger scale, not citywide, but larger scale, you have to pick where you want your distortion. So our forms of distortion, I can just choose a flat surface, just plump on top, just do a projection like through a plane. So what I do here is take every single point that's visible and just send a ray up through this thing. So I'd see a circle and I just project a ray from the surface of the sphere through a viewing plane. That's one way. You don't see that looks like this, one of these circular maps that you'll see. I can use a cone. So how it projects on a cone looks like this. And this is a cylindrical way. If I imagine wrapping a cylinder around the world and just putting the positions on the points from the globe onto where it projects onto this cylinder. And that's a cylindrical projection. Here's the interesting thing. Here, the Mercator Map Projection is a cylindrical map. It's a very famous cylindrical map. It's what most of us are used to in terms of a map of the world. I think Google still is using it. Maybe it's not, but it could still be using it. It did use it for a good long while. You'll see it all sorts of different places. The Gall-Peters projection is a slightly different thing, but in all cases, you have to sort of twist your geometry. Notice what I have here. I have uniform grid pattern, effectively uniform grid pattern. Mill cylindrical projection, I think is, this gets distorted. So they have a bit of projection pattern. It's actually why I'm wearing checkers today. But depending on how I'm doing this projection, I will distort the world in some way. This is actually what I grew up with, seeing as the correct way of doing a projection, because you cannot represent much of the Earth correctly. Instead, it's like peeling an orange. You peel the orange and you flatten it out. You'll get distortion everywhere, but it's not as bad as this thing. This is really bad distortion. There's a reason why we have the Mercator map. And it's in the videos, but does anyone know why we have the Mercator map looking the way why the Mercator map sort of took off the way it did? I could have used this one. I could have used this one. What's the point of the Mercator map? It does have a benefit. Nothing? Turns out the Mercator map doesn't distort the ocean. If you're trying to sail a ship around the world or in the world, the Mercator map is the way to go because the oceans don't get distorted. And if I want to go from here to here, or if I have shipping lanes and the like, it's great for that. I know exactly what I need to do to go from here to make sure I don't get lost. It distorts, the view is distorted, but the math and how I travel the world isn't. If I do something like Gall-Peters, if I try and go from here to here and I'm using the map to follow along and I just say, okay, I'm going to stay at the same latitude, stay at the same latitude. Longitude goes this way, latitude goes this way. Same latitude. I'm going so I look from here to here and I say it's same latitude and I start traveling. I end up in the wrong place. So the Mercator map is great for navigation. It is garbage if you want to have a view of the world. Because look at Greenland. Greenland is massive compared to Africa. Except it's not. Africa is actually mammoth. It's huge. Greenland's this little tiny thing. And so we have this extreme distortion on the poles. which of course makes people point out the fact that if you were living in a northerly climate, you think all these places in the southerly, more warm southerly climates around the equator are tiny little places that don't mean anything, but they're huge and they're important. And it's just this sort of colonial impression that we have on the world. Part of what I wanted to point out is the way you present your data actually distorts how you view the world and how you view and the conclusions you make about the world. This is just one example. But if I'm showing COVID tests and I show my data in one way, it'll actually change how I think about the world. If I show where the red light cameras are and I show it in a different way, it'll change how I view the world, whether red light cameras are useful or not. And you have to consciously be aware of how you're representing your data to make sure either you're trying to distort the world for the person, but if you're not trying to distort the world, and I don't think you should, if you're not trying to distort the world for somebody, then you need to be consciously aware of your design decisions actually influence how they see things. By the way, this is another video about how the world gets distorted. It's by Hannah Fry. I have another Hannah Fry video as well in there later on for storytelling. I just love the fact that it's the nerdiest map ever. It's the least distorted way you can do a map of the world for a 3D space, but you can't actually read the map at all. Because you're making these circles that span out, you don't distort the projection, but things are not lined up at all. But yeah, you can look at it. And I also love the fact that it's a British person talking about map problems. The British Empire is famous for just randomly choosing lines on a map and saying, yeah, that's where that country is. And to hell with the consequences later. That's just bias. But if you look at, the map of the Middle East, it's that. It's like, yeah, we're in a country there. So even the Boston's public school system, I think the UN as well, just got rid of the Mercator map because it distorts how people view the world. Here's the Mercator Map Projection. Look at Greenland. Canada is this mammoth country that's crushing everyone. Look how big we are. Look how important we are. We're not that big and important. Here's Gulf, Peter. It still distorts things. If you thought Canada was important, this is Canada. This is a continent of Africa, but Canada is not that much bigger than the United States. It's not that much bigger than Brazil. It's not that much bigger than India. It's not that much bigger than China. It's bigger, but not that much bigger. We think we're more important than we are because the Mercator map really stretches out the Northwest Territories and none of it. But it's great for ocean navigation, which is why it was popularized to begin with. Really drastically exaggerates the poles. And so this is endorsed by the UN. I actually like the one that I always forget the name. I'm not going to go back to it. The one that is the sinusoidal pattern, because that by separating out the bottom parts, you don't get that distortion in the poles quite as much, but you get the accuracy of the ocean navigation as well. But people just don't like it. And the question is, how big is Australia? Because people always think it's not that big. Everyone thinks the UK is big. This is the UK in Australia. And the UK is small comparatively. Here's Japan in Australia. Turns out the island of Japan is about, I think it's smaller than Labrador, but it's slightly bigger than the island of Newfoundland. Yeah. Here is, I think, all of Europe in Australia, right? You can compare these things. More importantly, the True Size is a great little website for this, and we're going to do this as an activity in a second. Here is me, not me, but here is someone putting India, Eastern Europe, Italy, Germany, France, Spain, China broken into two parts, but still just China here. Here's Japan, here's the United States, all fitting in Africa. People think of Africa, it's just a small little nation. No, it's mammoth. It is huge, but the Mercator map has distorted our worldview of things. So we're going to do this as an in-class activity in a second. I'll just show one other, hopefully, that in a second. But I like pointing this out. This would be another example of how our worldview is changed by how we see the maps. This is, of course, the world just upside down. There's no point, there's no reason why we have the orientation that we do, other than the fact that it's coming from, a lot of these maps are being made by Europeans or people living in the north and assuming everything south is just, uncharted territories, that sort of thing, where the emphasis is on the top. That Australia is not the ruler of the world. It's, all of these northern countries. And that the distortion that we put in the north is because they're maps being created by northern countries at the time when people are mapping and colonizing the world. Just something to think about. You're checking your own biases when it comes to how we're representing data and how we think about the world based off of what we see for the data. Okay, so I wanted to do this as a quick activity. Try thetruesize.com. I haven't tried it this year, so maybe they've removed the website, but let's have a quick look at it. You can take a country and just put, Ghana into whatever country you want and see how it goes. We're all going to put Canada in there, I know, or maybe China or some other country if you're from another country, but take a country and see where it fits in the world. It is alarming to see how things shift as you go up at north and south. So we're not going to do a full activity on this one, but try this out just to see what you get. I'm going to do the same thing. Video. Mm-hmm. Bigger than Australia. It's a continent. Let's do. Turn it off. No. Let's see what other country. What would be a good country? Should I Peru? Something smaller. All right. Here's Peru and Canada. I would not have thought Peru to be a giant country. It's not giant, but pretty damn big, right? It's still completely crushing Iceland. It's completely crushing the United Kingdom. It's completely crushing Sweden. And it's Peru. Right? I don't normally think of Peru as being this mammoth thing that, overtaking the world. What's another one? What's another good one? Haiti? All right. So how big is Haiti? Well, it's almost the size of Newfoundland. That's good to know. Let's move it around. It's crushing PEI. It's, bigger than Vermont. So if you thought these places were not significant, that's just Haiti. And I always think of that as a tiny, tiny little island. Not so tiny. And this is just me randomly choosing some place. I mean, here it is in Eastern Ontario. And let's move it over to Ireland. And it's smaller than Ireland, but not that much smaller than Ireland. All right. Dominican Republic, Cuba. Cuba might be a nice one. I mean, this is not. It's far longer than my home province. It's probably bigger than Nova Scotia. And yeah, people always think of the Mercator map has really distorted how we view the world. I'm going to just bail on this here, but just something to think about. The other thing is it also distorts how we view shipping, right? The way to travel from Toronto to Japan is not to go in a straight line. It's actually to go up and over. It's not projection up. It's actually going up north and back down again because the paths are actually faster, but you'll do it the wrong way if you don't understand that it's a sphere, not a flat surface. Again, it's something to think about, but I love this one here. Why? Because I get to show parallel coordinates. Parallel coordinates. So here are our parallel coordinates. See how you can see the area, area L. Here's how things are scaled. Here's a Mercator map, for example. It's completely wonky here. The other ones down here are, the scale is really quite extreme. It's scaling things a lot. Accuracy at the 40th percentile and 150th percentile. Yeah, there, you can check all the various ways that maps are working, but notice that there's a nice little crossover effect where all of them are going, a lot of the maps are going down to the zero where you're not trying to distort the area. Anyways, parallel coordinates and why they're useful and how they can, I don't think you can brush these, but I can select a particular thing and I can see how it relates to all the other projections that we have. Okay. Oh, this is just a weird, I'm showing all these sorts of things. It'll just keep on changing your projection type. I think it just keeps on changing projection type. Yeah, there you go. And rotating the world. All right. So let's get to the point that I'm trying to make after all this. In reality, for your visualizations, and not just for maps, this is a big lesson for maps, but for you in general, what your actual data looks like, what your view or how you design something. In the case of a cartographer, it's them designing the map. Then the map is actually the artifact that they're looking at, but it's not reality. Your visualizations are not reality. They are you making a design based off the visualizations, but ultimately you have an artifact at the end, like a map, like your visualization, like a bar chart. And then how the person interprets that is based off of the artifact, not the original data. Meaning that if I make a visualization that grossly distorts what reality is, I'm going to grossly distort things for the user. They're going to see the wrong information. Your job is to show the information that is critical for the user and not to distort it. Because if you distort it, they're going to see things wrong. So if you make, you're doing COVID rates and you make it blood red for high COVID rates, but your high COVID rates scale each time. So in the middle of summer, there's very low COVID rates. There's 4 cases and it's blood red in that city. Well, now everyone's in a panic because it looks like there's this huge crisis in that one particular area. The way you decide the data, or the fact that you're using a chloropleth map instead of some other kind of map, and so suddenly you think that the NDP are absolutely crushing in the election because there's a huge swath of orange on the map. Or maybe you're looking at COVID rates and North America and Ontario doesn't look that bad because the large chunk of the north of Ontario, which is a large geographic mass with not a lot of people, relatively few people, does not have that high of a rate of COVID. Yet Toronto is absolutely chock full of COVID cases, or at least it was in the past. It distorts how you view things. Ultimately, your design decisions dictate what the person sees, and it's something to be taken seriously. Okay, we had 3 types of maps, by the way. So just getting back to maps, because I know you're all thrilled. edge of your seat for maps, we're 3 broad categories of maps. One of them is a referential map. Most of you might be doing a little bit of that. A referential map is, yeah, this is what the map looks like. This is where things are, right? Not overly crazy. We have a thematic map. I'm looking at COVID cases. There's a theme to my map. I'm looking at hockey rinks. I'm looking at where I could go to go skating. Or the thematic is more that's more special purpose for like COVID case, for where you can get a COVID test, that sort of thing. But a thematic map is I'm designing it for a particular purpose, but I don't know exactly what you're doing, but it's for, I'll give you an example, it's better. So several types of spatial data without an emphasis one over the other. The generic vanilla, the manila envelope of maps, right? If I just want to show a map of Ottawa, this is what it looks like. A thematic map is I want to emphasize particular attributes. So, categories of land cover, for example, if I want to show what the elevation is around Ottawa, if I want to see what the forestry rate in Ottawa is, or not forestry, but the amount of green space in Ottawa, for example. I don't know what exactly they're doing, but there's a theme, there's a purpose to the map. I don't know how you're exploring it, but there's a purpose to it. And a special purpose is I needed to do this particular task. I'm looking for COVID tests, this particular task. Thematic would be more, I want to see the hospital, the amount of space between hospitals or something about, the hospital system. But I'm not just saying I want to find a place to get a COVID test. It's more general than that. And this would be the better way of explaining things. Here is, where are we talking this? Where is this? Thailand, right? I should know my countries by now, but Thailand. Here's the general map of Thailand. Now, they even showed the roads. Okay, fine. It's a useful bit of information. We even get a little bit of elevation and if it's mountainous or not. But I don't know what you're using that map for. It could be for any number of things. Here is the vegetation in Thailand. I'm emphasizing where the vegetation is in various places. Still the same map. It's just that. And here's a special purpose map. It's the rail system. Anyone that's done the Indian rail system or anyone that's taken subways in various places, anyone's gone on rail system in Italy, for example, same thing. You sort of need the help, right? It can be very convoluted and very complex. I think Chinese rail system, same thing. It can be very convoluted and very complex. You make a specialized map where you're emphasizing the rail lines. I don't give two craps about the countryside. I don't care about anything. I care about going from point A to point B. I have a task on the rail system. So that's a special purpose map. It's for helping people navigate the train system, the rail system. This is thematic. I don't know exactly what they're doing with this, but this is for finding my train to go from point A to point B. This is, I want to see something about, plants. This is, I don't know what I'm used for, what it's used for. It's better than nothing, but if I'm trying to drive on the highway, I don't sort of want this. I want a special purpose map of the roads in Thailand. Here's an even more specialized map. The tourist map is one of my personal favorites. If anyone's gone to Disney World or Disneyland, actually been a tourist anywhere, you've seen this sort of thing and you may not have realized what you had. Look what the city of Paris's map looks like. What do you see here? You see, this is where all the tourists like to go. So I'm going to put this on the map. It is where it's simplified to the point of being almost stupidly simple. It emphasizes things that are important like food, washroom, subways. I get rid of any and all clutter if I can. And I point out and slap them in the face with the best path from point A to point B. It is shockingly direct. And this is not even the best possible case of it, but Paris is pretty big. Here's the Disney map, right? I'm getting rid of all this other detail. I'm just trying to get the overview of where everything is, how I can find stuff, and notice where the landmarks are. It's frontier land And the mountains, the things you can see from far away, are emphasized. The individual areas that I'm looking for that I can find fairly easily. If I want to go to Tomorrowland, boom, it's over here. I know exactly where it is, and they're pointing out the big places like there's Space Mountain over here. You're trying to make it so that people don't have a lot of time. They're new to the area. You need to make it more obvious. If it's someone that lives in the city, you can get detailed because they may actually be looking for that particular street. But I don't want to show all this. I have a limited amount of bandwidth, visually bandwidth, so I'm making this thing direct and obvious. So here are geographic maps or street maps. So one type of map. I can also do a flow map. I can put lines on top of the map to show how things transfer one to the other. I can also do chloropleth maps, which is a kind of statistical map. I can do contour maps, which isopleth maps. So places with a large amount of COVID would be like this. It's not based off of these geographic areas. The actual data itself tells you the outline or the shape of things. Or a statistical plot map, or Pinmap is one of the groups we're calling it. I like it as a term, right? I can put glyphs all over the place for where everything is, or put a pin for what the kind of data I'm looking for. This is perhaps more of one of the more useful ones for you guys, because it allows me to put exact data there without distorting it. Texas looks too powerful in the United States because it's a huge geographic area. Or when you look at if you ever look at the voting, or where people voted for president, right? It's all this red. It's smack dab in the center, this huge amount of red, and all this little blue on the outline. And you go like, how are Democrats ever winning an election? And then you realize that New York State and California have, like, I can't remember what percentage of the populace, but it's a huge percent. Like California is, I think, 60 million people, something like that. It's a country's size worth of people in one state, and they all vote Democrat. And New York, same thing, right? A lot of these states, North Dakota does not have a large population, yet it has a large geographic area, and so it's distorting things. Here's a Google Street Map, where again, if I want, I can add extra layers, take away layers, because it depends on the task that I'm doing. And so this is just showing high-level things. It's showing things that I might be interested in, like food, like places where I can stay, but it's not trying to show everything all at once. When I zoom in, then it can show more information. Here's a wind map. I actually love this wind map. Let's see if I can give an example. It doesn't do it justice unless you actually see it. There you go. Do you know where the wind goes and how the wind operates in North America on October 29th, 2012? I do. There's clearly something happening right there, like a hurricane almost, if not a hurricane. And maybe I can even change the particular dates. Oh, there we go. There's a gallery of these things. That's Hurricane Sandy. Sandy's landfalls right here. There's hardly any wind. Big turbulence right there. With a map. There are ways of doing things with a map that you may not have even thought about. And I can even do a network. When we look at networks, that like a node link diagram, you can overlay it on top of a map, see how things are related to the point. Oh, and then there's this one. I found this fascinating. Was doing a live demo of this thing, and then found out why everyone calls, Boston. I never thought of Boston as overly racist. And then, like, there's supposed to be some underlying racial tensions, but it never really came across until I looked at this thing and went, oh, it is racist. Or there's a huge problem here in Boston and we don't even realize it. So let me see if I can get that up and running. Got a lot of stuff going on here. I'll switch back to it in a second. So maps are intuitive, and we can even look at subway maps, which is a special kind. It's a very dedicated map where you're allowed to distort geography to make it cleaner for how the subway works, because you have a particular task, which is getting from point A to point B. I care about where I go in and where I get off the subway. I don't care about how the subway line works underground. How I present the map leads to distortion. I may not realize that there is a distortion. And so you can really mess with the user. What that goes for all of our visualizations, but I cannot assume it's easy or intuitive. You got to try a bunch of things. Your first guess is not good enough normally. And you really must be merciless when it comes to reducing clutter. Get anything out of there that is not critically important. If you're trying to represent or show some particular kind of data, get everything else out of there. Don't show me hotels if you're showing me COVID tests, right? Unless it's where I could go for a hotel to quarantine myself. So part of your job is also to clean up and streamline your visualization. All right. I'm just going to go to storytelling, but I'm not sure how much. I have a little bit of time for storytelling. All right. So here, by the way, is the Boston Research Map. And let me see here. Boston Neighborhood Survey, I think. Perceived crime and disorder, historical census. There we go. The 2000 census. Median income for Boston. If we want to see that, here's what it looks like. And maybe I can turn off this one. All right. So who is making certain amounts of money in 2000? That is really surprising given the fact it's Boston. It's normally very, very affluent, but I'm assuming people living in the inner city or part of the city, which I would not have normally assumed, have this. Notice we have also an overlay in terms of the actual roads themselves and major highways going into and out of the city. This is one form of encoding where I'm using the saturation per pixel to indicate how much income people are making in particular regions, particular areas. And I can look at this area, this area. This, by the way, these other regions over here are not Boston. Cambridge is not part of Boston, by the way. But here's the percentage of the white population based on a 2000 census. Okay, so I want to see if I can explain this properly to you guys. Everywhere that's extremely dark has a high percentage of the white population. It's very sort of homogeneous. They're essentially just a large number of white people in the one area. It's all the way around Boston and little pockets like this. This is a brand new area where they made the airport and they put more land in there. This North Shore. Let's turn that off. Let's go percentage of Black population in the 2000 survey. This is what I found shocking. There's the Black population in Boston. That's the reason why it doesn't seem that racist in Boston, because the groups are not mixing at all. There's a large Black population right here. There's a large white population right here. If I went with the Hispanic population, I think it ends up being here. The Asian populations end up being, I think, around here. Like, it's very segregated without necessarily intending to be segregated, but it's because I didn't see a lot of, there wasn't a large Black population where I was, because the groups were not mixing at all in Boston. There's these historical regions where people just sort of stick in their own area. And it becomes like, oh, that's why there's a huge problem. That's a huge problem if there's no mixing at all within the various groups based on demographics. It's just one of those things. It might be a powder keg ready to blow. That's a little point of concern. When I saw that, I was like, oh my gosh. There's Black population, Hispanic population, there's Hispanic 2000. It's right here. Right along this line here. Okay, I'll leave that alone. I just found that sort of shocking. This is the true size of, let's get out of that. think I just stopped projecting here. So I've been yammering for a while, and we did these little in-class exercises. So I just, can I answer any questions that you have about, if there's any questions people have about maps? It's not obvious. It seems obvious, but I would really, if you have a map, I would really love, expect to get some kind of feedback for how you can tweak it or how you can improve it, because your first guess is not necessarily the right one. Try a couple other iterations. You might miss the point, or you might be missing certain parts of it. That's fine. Just, you might want to try a couple other iterations, because it's not obvious what the best approach is. And it's not just one way to do a map. If you have a bunch of maps, you have a whole lot of different approaches. So for the where to work out or where to do exercise in Ottawa group, each one of those points where there's a activity that you can do, you can encode a whole lot of data per point. But you might also want to say, like, if I'm looking from Ottawa from a high level standpoint, which I don't think you should do, but from a high level standpoint, maybe I could encode each of the wards, each of the areas of Ottawa based off the number of services that they have per season in that area, to see which communities are underrepresented in terms of number of skating rinks, number of swimming pools, number of tennis courts. Different task. If I'm looking at red lights, maybe it's the number of red light cameras per district, or it might be emphasizing individual red light cameras and having a glyph for the number of violations as it catches and the length of time it's been there, or the traffic flow through and the number of violations it's catching per red light camera. And let people zoom in, and if they zoom out too far and you can no longer see individual cameras, you can amalgamate them. Things like that. Okay. We're going to get a little bit into this. I was expecting to go further, but I'm yammering. So storytelling is one of those things that, it seems intuitive, right? Who doesn't know how to tell a story? It's important for you guys because this is sort of what the MPD degree is. This would normally be a tacked on lecture at the very end of this course, and I realize I have to sort of put it more forward. We're going to talk about general storytelling techniques, but also just the overall approach. It's still relatively new, early days for what we're talking about here, because we're going to look at very basic narrative elements. We're going to learn about storytelling scenarios and how it informs your visualization itself, and the similar genres from Jeff here. The person who gave us D3 also did this one as well. That's crazy prolific. He went to Stanford and just like, I'm going to go to Stanford now. I don't want to go to Stanford. I'm going to go to University of Washington, one of the other best schools on the planet. Oh, so I'm going to do the in-class exercise on this one, but let's point out this particular visualization. Here is the march of Napoleon's march. And again, we've talked about this earlier, but you could see over time how his troops shrank, where they were going, what was going on as they went. They go up to Moscow, they get their butt kicked, and they scamper on back. And notice it's using a different color on the return path to give you this narrative of how it's flowing and how to follow, how your eyes should be following this thing. It tells the full story by you just tracking your eyes and moving back again. So we're not talking like an actual story. It's presenting the data in a way to guide people to a conclusion. It is not exploration. It is not discovery. So the you had a cool name and I'm blanking on it here, but the investment group, it's not Data Dudes. Are you Data Dudes? The investment group, the Ottawa investment group, you're not doing this at all, right? Different task. You're not trying to guide people into a conclusion. People are discovering what they can invest in. Very different. That's the traditional way we do visualization stuff. Same thing with the COVID cases. But if I'm trying to tell a story through my data, if I'm trying to guide people to changing their behavior, for example, if I'm looking at environmentalism and I'm seeing how much energy you're using, you can let them discover things about their own energy uses, but you're guiding them to a conclusion. You're trying to get them to change their behavior. And you want them to, it's not a given that they're going to change their behavior. So your job is to guide them to explore their behavior a little bit at a time to finally come to the conclusion like, oh crap, I got to change how I'm, what I'm doing in terms of my energy usage. Maybe I should turn down my thermostat. Maybe I should stop using my air conditioner when it's not needed that day. Maybe I should, name something that is a huge sink for energy sink for your house. I should stop doing that. Does leaving my light bulbs on make that much of a difference? No, oh, but my air conditioner is a huge difference. That's what we're looking for. You're guiding them. So this is one of the classic examples. In fact, this is done before we even had this technology. It was done by hand. He's a pioneer for graphics and engineering and statistics, and Tufte loves this thing. And I can understand why he loves this thing. Here's the other thing. If I go to black and white, I still get the same story. Get it right in black and white, remember? Right? It's a well-designed, and this is the English translation, by the way, of that. There you go. The English translation of that entire thing, in case you don't read French. Right? You can see how Napoleon's march goes, and you can clearly see the different stages of that march and how it changes over time. So we've already looked at this, but you can look at it again if you want. The New York Times hurricane visualizations. We had a story, and as I walked through the story, I got a different visualization as I'm walking along the story. It's helping motivate the story, much like a figure helps motivate your work when you're writing an essay. As you go along, you're getting a bit more information as you go. And we have a whole bunch of other ones, including Hannah Fry's. This is just some Twitter thing she shared. Hopefully it's going to automatically start. It's automatically starting. Okay, so this is with normal hand washing. This is with extra hand washing. Notice there is a story being told here. This is how bad the coronavirus outbreak happens based on a simulation, spread of this flu-like virus, not even coronavirus. Flu-like virus if you do more hand washing or not over time. This is from what? What year? When is this? March 2nd last year. It's very clear what they're trying to indicate. It's clear what they're trying to indicate. I think it's evocative. I think it's believable what they're actually trying to say here. Right? That if you do extra hand washing, it will slow the spread of a disease, which gives you more chances to actually fight it over time. We have the World Health Map. That's a nice little story as well. We have all sorts of different coronavirus, COVID-19 stories that you can tell through this. And there's been a number of research papers written on the topic. So when we come back next time, we're going to look at Jeff here and Edward Siegel's look at this. A lot of people, including Robert Cosara, have talked about this, telling stories through data. What was interesting about this is, they're talking about narratives and what's in a good narrative, but here's the thing. We're not doing this. We're doing this, how you present or communicate to others. So the person making the visualization is presenting it to others for them to understand. And people might do narrative storytellers or look at a narrative visualization for enjoyment as well, potentially. So not there, but there. I wanted to jump to what we're actually looking at. I'll get to all that stuff in a second. There we go. That's what I wanted to do. This is a number of papers that they were looking at over time when it comes to narrative storytelling and different visualizations that have been generated over time. So they took classic visualization stories and they mapped what each of these things were doing using this matrix. And then came up with a series of narrative structures, visual structures, and 7 genres of visualizations how you can present a visualization, use a visualization to tell a story. And we'll get to that next time around. In the meantime, what we're going to do next, my plan of attack at least, is I'm just going to come back. We're going to go away for about 10 minutes, come back, and I'm just going to help different groups talk about the project. I know we went long last time, but I need that time to make sure that I can talk to various groups about this. What we might do is just do little breakout rooms, talk to individual groups, come ask me for help or ask me for advice for your project, and we can work through how we can tweak some of your designs for your P4, because I want to make sure that we're all on the same page. It's not what I want, it's what the task sort of demands. And that's what I want to be making sure that we have the data right for you guys, that we have the task in mind, and it's the correct task in mind, that we think we can justify the task, and that it's actually your visualization is actually trying to achieve that task. It's trying to help people do that task. So is it a story? Is it discovery? Is it just for fun? What is this visualization for? What's the task you're doing? And does it solve the problem? And so I want to go through as many groups as I can. We're just going to use it to try and refine your P3 to your P4 idea, so that when you go to implement this thing, it looks right. Okay. In the meantime, also, make sure you can start testing and implementing or trying out Vegalite or whatever technology you're using for your final visualization. You can use Google Maps if it's the right tool for the job, but Vegalite seems to be one of the easier approaches for us. Okay, so we'll come back in a little while and we'll have a look at your projects, and I'll try to give some advice. Thanks, everyone. I'm going to pause. Actually, I'm going to pause, stop the recording. All right, thanks.